Hello and a very warm welcome to this 2020 webinar series. This is the first one. And as before, we're going to do one on the first Wednesday of every month at 6 o'clock. So we've already got the schedule lined out for the year, and you can have a look at the website to see what we've got. Okay. All right, so this presentation is going to be a bit different because I'm not using slides as I normally do. I'd firstly like to say a very warm and happy new year to all of you. After all the restrictions we've experienced to normal human behavior in the last couple of years, my belief is this is going to be a different year, an expansive year, and a gradual immersion of a new way of thinking. It's also the year of speaking our minds because, let's face it, for the sake of humanity, we really need to start talking and listening. For those of you who are used to my usual style of teaching, this webinar is going to be a wee bit different. I'm currently feeling very inspired to talk and teach from a level of what I'd call heartfelt compassion, something I do with my clients naturally, and we could also call it humanness. And I think we've been missing that in our lives lately. My wish is to empower you with just knowledge and stimulation of thought that's enriching to you and also your clients if you're in practice. While most of what I say will still be bedded in what we call evidence-based practice, I'm also going to be talking more from a perspective place. And I know there's a few Capetonians online, so this example of perspective will work for you. If you look over my shoulder here, you'll see a picture of Table Mountain. So I used to live in that city bowl. And when I worked with my clients, I would often ask them to climb up Table Mountain, peer down over the city below, just to see how small their house is and their workplace is within the big scheme of things, in the process gaining life perspective. So today we're all going to climb our personal mountains. So just take a moment to visualize what that looks like. Because I'm not working with slides today, it's a little bit differently. So just, get your cup of tea, sit back and listen intently. Let your thoughts drift to whatever they need to drift to. I'll talk for about 30 minutes and then Simone will share some info with you about our upcoming courses. And then I'm going to invite in a few of my highly attuned colleagues to contribute their thoughts as well. And then we'll have the usual Q&A session. So I'll let the webinar run as long as there is good interest, basically. Okay, so as mentioned in the description of this webinar, in the quest for scientific knowledge, we often find ourselves peering down through a microscope and making more and more specific observations. However, I personally now find myself rather looking through a telescope, gazing up to the stars with childlike wonder and just allowing creative thought into my life. I feel that's really important. As a practitioner, our clients often don't care about that infinite detail. What they want is to improve their health and fitness within the context of their particular life. And that's what we're calling an N of 1 now. So one subject in a research study, i.e. individuality. This webinar is not going to be as athlete-centered as usual. It's going to be human-centered. But I'm going to start with the premise that an athlete is a human being who needs to begin from a space of health before performance can be layered upon it. What's more, athletes are actually more prone to immune compromise than many of the rest of us, meaning that they need careful management, especially at this time. So I'm going to go into that later. What has happened in the world over the past 2 years is not a pandemic of a singular microorganism. It's a pandemic of a singular word, and that word is fear. We've all experienced what might be described as dictatorial-like action on behalf of our governments and so-called health providers, which I would avidly argue causes an inordinate amount more immune suppression than would otherwise be caused by one single virus. Right at the start of the period of COVID restrictions, I hosted a couple of webinars when I talked about the old germ and terrain theories, which is a basic concept that I think we need to keep revising because that core message is not getting through. In short, Pierre Bichon, who's a Frenchman a couple of hundred years ago, was the first person to discover airborne microbes. And he went on to understand that these formed a symbiotic relationship with our body's own immune system, which he called the terrain, so the germ and the terrain. Unfortunately, as the story goes, Louis Pasteur stole Bichon's work and construed it in a way that led us to believe that all disease was caused by these microbes. And that, therefore, was the early beginnings of a medical fear model that still pervades today. And trillions of dollars have been made from that same narrative of agents that battle our bugs. The germ and the terrain are two different aspects of health and disease that are intricately combined, so much so that we can't separate them. However, lately, we've only been presented with one side of the story. It's been a period of propaganda. So that's a word I don't use lightly. The germ is bad and we must kill it. How often have we heard those kind of sentiments? And I could add in, and the vaccine will cure us. And even if those statements were to be true, which they most certainly are not, what is taken away in that process of belief in a story like this is an incredibly important aspect of human health, which is almost my sole purpose for being a practitioner. And that short phrase is self-empowerment. Giving over control of your health to another power, which may or may not have your best interests at heart, can be severely disempowering. We'll expand on that point throughout the session because mental health essentially is an arrow that flies straight to the heart of physical health. I mentioned sides of the story. I'm just going to share a little example with you from a truly excellent book called Thinking, Fast and Slow. The author takes 38 big chunky chapters to discuss fast intuitive thinking and slow rational thinking. He shared a particularly interesting experiment where during a court trial, one group of subjects heard only the arguments of the prosecution lawyer, whereas the other group of subjects heard only the defense lawyer's arguments. And you can guess the outcome. The group who only heard the prosecution arguments thought the person on trial was guilty as sin, whereas the other group thought that the person was an angel. This is essentially a blatant example of not being presented the whole picture, which is a common thing that actually happens in the media. We can see that right now, and in scientific literature. An example of that is, I've written an article called Intermittent Fasting, the Other Side of the Story. There's so many scientists, journalists, podcasters who really rev up how good intermittent fasting and fasted training is for our health. And that's an argument that's really easy to back up with science because there's plenty there. However, in my contextual client practice, I've seen so many people who are struggling with their energy, their vitality, their hormonal health, their libido, because they're forcing themselves to exercise when they don't really have energy because they haven't fed themselves properly. And then bring in a well-timed meal or snack or sports drink or something that supports those morning sessions, and hey, they come back to life. So context is key to any scientific observation. Okay, always remember that. Good scientists and good politicians will naturally debate topics like this, equally engaging in both sides of the story for us. And us, the observers, can come up with our own informed decision. It's kind of like the opposites game that kids learn at school, which my kids have recently gone through. So let's try that for a second. What's the opposite of fear? What's the opposite of outsource? Insource. What's the opposite of disconnect? Well, self-connection. So these are all kind of good and bad things, but we need both. We need one to get the other. Finally, what's the opposite of disease, which is a narrative pushed by our so-called health providers? Health, of course. So I would really like us to get into the pattern of this mindful knowingness of what's right for us as a singular person, the people around us, and for the good of global ecology, which quite frankly is at a crisis point. So having started with the telescope view, the mindful view, the connectivity view, let's have a sneak look through the microscope for a minute or two, which is also really important to do. Microorganisms, including bacteria and viruses, have been on this planet an awful long time before we have, meaning that we've co-evolved with these tiny beings. For this presentation, I'm going to focus more on viruses because that's what many of us are afraid of at the moment. Viruses have played a critical role in major evolutionary transitions, including the creation of RNA, DNA, that's our genetics, plus the origin of the eukaryotic nucleus, which is basically multicellular organisms. So the reason we are here is because of these evolutions. Certain research has estimated that about 380 trillion viruses live in or on our body at one time, 10 times more than the bacteria that live around us, which we already think is 10 times more than the cells we have in our body. So that's quite a lot, really. Also, it's been estimated that 8% of our DNA consists of remnants of ancient viruses, and another 40% is made up of strings of genetic letters that have viral origin. So it could be that half of our DNA is actually non-human. So are we humans giving host to bugs or bugs giving host to humans? There lies the question. So just like the microbiome, the human virions actually received prolific research attention over the last decade, and it's been mapped to the point where we can understand where certain, what part of our bodies certain viruses come from, and it's been shown that we can even identify people from the same households by our viral makeup. Quite amazing. Also, viral diversity seems to be critical to our health. And people living old-fashioned, rural, and healthy lifestyles appear to have greater viral numbers and diversity than people in cities. So let the kids play in the dirt. Let's grow our own veggies. That's actually what we should be doing. Viruses also appear to have contributed to a huge number of evolutionary jumps. I'm going to give one example, but there's many. Viral invaders have been critical to humans learning to digest starch. The insertion of an endogenous retrovirus, yes, retrovirus like HIV is a retrovirus, near the human pancreatic gene for making amylase has led to the expression of amylase in saliva. And that's an evolution that's had a profound effect on the diversity of food available to us as humans. How many more food types could we now digest compared to before that happened? We could even go on and ask, whether the SARS-CoV-2 is stressing our bodies to another evolutionary leap. We could only hope. It's possible. Is it therefore possible for a single species of microorganism, in this case SARS-CoV-2, to maim or kill us? Well, kind of. As we've seen, many people have died or had severe reactions to the infection. But the virus itself was only really a trigger to push an already imbalanced system further out of balance. We need to remember that the vast majority of us have shrugged the infection off without too much compromise. So with this individual response in mind, we need to consider the health of the other bugs that synergistically interact with our cells, just like Pierre Bichon described in the terrain theories, a long time ago. I was trying to discuss the bug thing with my two kids the other day, because they've both got or had bad rashes on their hands because they've been taught to scrub their hands for 30 seconds in the school with harsh sanitizers. So I said, well, if we have 1,000 good soldiers in our army and only 10 bad ones, the baddies can't really do too much. But if we only have 100 good soldiers and 10 bad ones, then the baddies actually might have a chance of causing us some harm. So by overwashing your skin, they were strategically stripping back the good bugs on their skin and allowing these opportunistic infections to occur. So here's another opposites test. What's the opposite of kill? I like the term nourish. So let's nourish our good bugs to look after us. It's time for us to recognize the innate beauty and wisdom of nature and to relinquish the ignorant idea that we can overcome it. Even if this turns out to be a man-made virus, battling with bugs is akin to battling with our own bodies. So what about deeply nourishing the good bugs as an act of self-compassion? I see a lot of cases in my clinic of broken self-love connections. And it's one of the most significant things that myself and also my wife do to help them move back towards self-empowerment. A good place to start is to love the vibrant and wholesome food that we consume, but it's, that's only a start. Okay, so I want to just pull back into the realm of athletes a little bit and contextualize some of this information for them. I know some of you will be thinking by now, yes, but to some of my observations. Yes, but many healthy athletes are having a hard time with COVID. And there's also this new thing called long COVID, which athletes seem to be susceptible to. So instead of bouncing back from an infection in a week or so, it might take them months. And yes, this is the case in some cases. Within the exercise immunology literature, which I share in depth in the Certificate of Integrative Sports Nutrition course, there are various models that have been created to represent the relationship between immune response and training load. So for instance, David Neiman is an exercise immunologist from Appalachian State University who I saw present in the 1990s when I studied there in North Carolina. Based on research observations at the time, he came up with this J-shaped curve to represent the training loads and immune susceptibility relationship. The lower end of the J, where you'd start writing it, represented sedentary people who had a moderate risk of upper respiratory tract infections, which was such as the common cold, which was how they used to monitor immune status. The dip, the lower part, represented moderately active people who were the most immune stable of the groups. And then the high end, the top of the J, was where the elite athletes trained, really pushing their boundaries, i.e. they're more immune susceptible. At the start of the century, an S-shaped curve was suggested. So if you tilt an S slightly, you kind of get a J and then it flips over at the end. So it was the same model, except they were suggesting with the elite athletes, it actually drops and you get a more moderate immune susceptibility. So the researchers tried to explain this by saying that elite athletes had superhuman capabilities to remain healthy. I've got a different explanation though. Not being a scientist who only sees the athletes in the context of the lab, I've worked with a wide range of athletes for many years, from easy recreational to top elite. The big difference between these groups are that elite athletes in most cases don't have to work. Obviously, there's exceptions. Most of the athletes at this high end plan their recovery strategies just as well as their training programs. High-end amateur athletes, however, like a lot of the ones I worked at in Johannesburg, they just loaded their day. They were working sometimes long hours, training long hours. They might have a family. They would limit their sleep. They didn't eat properly because they didn't really have the time to. In other words, they had a very high life load. So what this shows is the context, the overall context of the individual's life is as important, if not more important, than the good training plan or the good food that they're consuming. And I've asked my friend and colleague Paula Wren to talk more about what he discusses as the athlete's ecosystem later on. And also, we can't really discuss exercise immunology without looking at this very dreaded word, overtraining. If you directly compare the training load of elite professional athletes in a particular sport with that of high-level amateur athletes in the same sport, of course, the professional ones are going to train more. So with a pure definition of overtraining, you might consider that amateur athletes are less at risk of overtraining than the professional ones. But it's not that simple. It's not just the physical stress from training that's important. It's also the physiological stress from their neuroendocrine system, their metabolic balance or imbalance, musculoskeletal, gastrointestinal, and of course, immune stress or loading that they have. We also, of course, need to add in mental, emotional stress to this mix. And that's why I've invited in my yoga friend, Paul Carlos, along with mind-body specialist, Patricia Warby, and they'll talk to you a wee bit later as well. So I'd like to finish with a personal story, one which I hope will help you contextualize this kind of information I've been sharing. I was age 30, and I was right at the end of my middle distance running competitive career, although I was still in training and still hopeful that I'd get one last season out before I had to kind of get serious about my career. At the time, I'd been working in London for over a year as an S&C coach, working about 40 hours a week, mostly client hours, along with 40-minute cycle commutes both ways, plus more of a social life than I'd had previously as an athlete. Plus, I'd just bought a new flat, which I was renovating mostly by myself. And I'd taken on a third degree, which was via distance learning and maybe about 3/4 load of a full-time degree. Also, my girlfriend at the time had just started her first teaching job, and she liked to share her stress at the end of the day as well. One day I went to work and felt horrendous. By lunchtime was sent home. At the time I thought, well, a day or two rest and I'll bounce back. I went in the next day, was sent home. It took me about a week before I could actually sustain a working day. I just wasn't bouncing back. Felt rough and terrible, low energy, glands were raised. I went to the GP for blood tests. Of course, nothing came back. So I then got together with a nutritional therapist who tested me for adrenal stress and found that my adrenals were absolutely flatlined. Because cortisol is so important for immune stability or support, that was very clear why I wasn't bouncing back like I normally did. So I halted the renovations, I stopped studying, paused the study for a bit, and I swapped out all of my running for yoga for 6 months. I also took on a really comprehensive adrenal support program. And yeah, slowly got myself back on my feet over 6 months. What you could call my experience adrenal fatigue. You could call it overtraining syndrome in the bigger scheme of life load. But you can also very easily call it post-viral fatigue syndrome, because I've since tested positive for Epstein-Barr antibodies. But actually, most people, most Westerners, by the time they get to the middle of their life, have Epstein-Barr within their system, but only some of us are symptomatic. The big difference between symptomatic and asymptomatic people is not the bug. It's about the terrain. And really interestingly, there's some very early evidence indicating Epstein-Barr reactivation during cases of long COVID. Of course, it's going to be much, much more complex than that. So before we come out and state that there's all these healthy athletes getting long COVID, we need to really define what we mean by healthy. In medical terms, I was healthy until the day I was ill. Have a think about that for a minute. It's like Fred was healthy until he died of a heart attack. I don't think so. I'm going to round off by picking on my colleague, Simon Martin. He edits the ICANN magazine, which is a sister publication to FSN Mag. He's a really, really serious competitive masters runner in Colorado. I think he's now in his 60s. In the last ICANN Mag, within his editor's notes, he declared that he'd had a run-in with COVID-19. In his words, "I've got to admit being stunned by my own encounter with COVID. It was sudden onset, and I went from a hard training athlete to life as I imagine it is like for a frail, weak 90-year-old. It did shake my supreme self-confidence." You might look at that from a distance and say, oh, how did such a fit and healthy guy have such a terrible time? However, there's half a sentence I omitted from the quote, and here it is. "It hit me in a period of severe overtraining." That makes a world of difference. His physiological buffering capacity would have already been very, very low if he was already pushing the boundaries of training. So, you know, a novel virus comes in and his immune system doesn't respond quickly as it might otherwise have done. We read that people who are more endangered by the COVID infection are those with pre-existing conditions, including like diabetes, heart conditions, respiratory conditions, and also obesity, obviously. All of these conditions have inflammation as a core ongoing chronic response, along with potentially some metabolic imbalances and oxidative stress. All the virus is doing in these kind of cases is actually acting as a trigger to push an already imbalanced system into a further imbalanced state, which can in some cases become life-threatening. High levels of training, which hopefully aren't life-threatening, but especially if you're in a zone of overtraining, can be chronically inflammatory to the body. We therefore need to return to a question of balance. Balance between the elements in our lives that can keep us in a largely anti-inflammatory state versus pushing us into a pro-inflammatory state, or antioxidant state versus a pro-oxidant state, an immune stabilizing state versus an immune destabilizing state. Life perspective is key. We must never look at one small element of a person's life and make generalized judgment on the response that we see. We need to be good, well-rounded human beings and thorough practitioners, examining the entire ecosystem of our own lives and our clients' lives. And also for any story we encounter, we must always, always ask this very simple question: what is the other side of the story? So thanks for listening. I'm going to hand over to Simone now, who's going to tell you a little bit about the courses we have coming up. and then we'll hand over to our other guest speakers.
Okay, thanks, Ian. I'm just going to take 5 minutes to share some course information with you. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can everyone see the course webpage? Yep, okay. So as Ian noted earlier, I'd like to share some course information with you. So these are the 2 courses that we have on offer this year. So the first one is our Certificate of Integrative Sports Nutrition. And this certificate consists of 3 modules. So we have the Integrative Nutrition for Sporting Health. So we really dive into the functional or integrative model of nutrition, but within a sporting context. Then we have Applied Performance Nutrition. So we dive into the conventional sports nutrition, but always with the integrative slant to it. And then we have the 3rd module, which is a specialized one, because we bring in different lecturers to speak about their specialist topics. So it's kind of like a conference in that sense. And if you go onto a course page, you can click on these links and you can see all the different lectures that we cover. So this course is offered online. Each module is roughly 10 weeks, where you have access to video lectures and webinars. And then we have weekly tutorials where you'll interact with different lecturers and peers. So this is just a screenshot of the online platform. And then the course is assessed. So we have 3 assignments for each module, and they're all case study based. So it's a great way to apply the learning from the course. So as I said, the course is 100% online, but we are looking to make module 3 in person if we can, if the restrictions allow. And we will update the course webpage when we have more information on this. So the next intake starts on the 1st of February, and the full price is £2,300, but we do have an early bird discount available of £200, and that's available up until the 10th of January. So that's this coming Monday. And we also have additional discounts for any bands and bases members. They get a 10% discount, and students in their final year of studies, they get a 20%. So then on to our next course, Natural Sports Cookery, which was designed to be an extension of our certificate course, but we also offer it as a standalone option. And this is led by our lead lecturer, Rachel Jessen. She's a certified natural food chef who epitomizes a mind-body food connection. So what this means is that she views food more than just simply fuel. And what Rachel really teaches us in this course is how to use different preparation methods to transform foods into chosen energetic properties, such as groundedness, but also how to supersize the nutrient density of foods and how to maximize the absorbency of nutrients for an athletic body. And this course, like our other one, is offered online over 5 weeks. You'll have access to video lectures. There'll be weekly tutorials with Rachel. And there's also 2 food labs, so practical sessions, where you'll be cooking in your own kitchen with Rachel supervising in her own kitchen over Zoom. So this course, if you go onto the course webpage, you'll see the different topics for each week. So week 1 is like an introduction to natural cookery, but we also look at kitchen staples, roasting methods and marinating methods. Week 2, Rachel dives into energetic nutrition, and there's a food lab on this. Week 3, it's looking at the importance of cooking with foods in their whole form. There's also fermented food stocks and specific pressing methods. So you'll be making, Rachel will show how to make sauerkraut and rejuvelac. Week 4, Rachel really dives into sport-specific macronutrient awareness. So I think Ian also contributes for this week. And you'll learn how to create specific meal compositions for an athlete. So how to really plan a nourishing diet for an athlete. And then practical content, you're looking at breakfast granolas, DIY sports drinks, and smoothies. And if I'm not mistaken, yes, so there's a food lab on this topic from week 4 of how to create a meal composition for an athlete in your final week in week 5. And then it's just the wrapping together all the theoretical and practical components of the course. So a bit more information on Rachel if you want to have a read. And in terms of pricing, the full cost is $750, but we are offering an early bird discount of £200 up until Monday, this coming Monday, the 10th of January. And this course starts on the 20th of January.
Simone, that would be a little bit generous. So it was £50 discount.
Yes, sorry. So £50 discount, making it $700. And then there's also the additional discounts as the same as the certificate course. And we do have the monthly payments, but we've decided with everything that's been happening this last 2 years and all the restrictions involved, we've decided to waive the 10% surcharge for monthly payments. So it just makes it a bit easier on your cash flow. So if you're interested in either of these courses, please feel free to use the chat box. You can also email me or Ian directly. I'll pop in our email addresses in the chat box in case you're interested. So I think that's all. You can also go onto the webpage, both courses, and express your interest, and we will contact you directly from there. I think that's all. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Ian?
No, I think that's great. Did a good overview.
It was a really quick overview. Yes.
So I'd like to invite in Paul Carlos now, and he's going to add in his perspective on the discussion around immunology. Paul is who I consider as a yogi. He's been a mentor and a friend to me. He's based in South Africa, so it's getting to his bedtime now, but he's gracefully staying up for us. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Ian, and it's great to be here. And a warm welcome to everybody. I'm actually going to bed very early because I get up very early in the morning. So my background's predominantly yoga and spirituality.
Paul, you're breaking up quite a lot. I don't know if your internet's dropped down a wee bit. Changes you can make.
Okay, let me just try something here.
We could maybe get Patricia in first and then check back with you.
Yeah, okay, let's do that. Yeah, all right.
Okay. Patricia, are you ready to jump in?
Can do. Hi, everybody. Do you want me to introduce my background? Is that helpful?
Yeah, it's probably easier for you to do it. Just a quick one. Yeah.
My background is in research support, health research for universities, and also for postgraduate medical education as well. So I've worked both within primary care and in health research at a university level. I also am a health researcher myself. I was involved in a lot of studies that I did. And then I got ill with chronic fatigue syndrome in my mid-30s and then struggled to make sense of that. And I've been learning ever since all about natural medicine and subsequently also about the psychology of health and stress, really. The stress response, which is so key to a lot of what we're seeing right now in the world. Now, stress, we know from, maybe an athletic perspective, is a good thing. If it's acute, it's hormetic, it helps mitochondria to up their game, to be more energy efficient, and we generally encourage that. So exercise obviously is a hormetic stress. But there are other sorts of stressors that people don't talk about so much, or they're not so aware of. And these are chronic long-term stresses of maybe poor relationships, juggling work and training, those sorts of stresses. And there are also childhood events that impact the autonomic nervous system. So things that you went through as a child that have not been fully metabolized, which I refer to as sort of unresolved emotional stress. Another name for that is trauma, emotional trauma, but the trauma word is often one that we misunderstand. We think it's one-off events like being in a tsunami or being, threatened at gunpoint or something, but relational stresses are much more significant for the average person. And they often cause behaviors that add more stress. So addictive behaviors, and you can be addicted to training as much as you can, alcohol or smoking. And so we see addictive behaviors, coping strategies of all kinds that sort of come in to try and mitigate or cope with the unresolved emotional stresses from past experience. And that's really where I specialize right now. So how that affects immunity is actually via what we call psychoneuroimmunology, where the stress response system, which obviously is in the limbic part of your brain, we sometimes call it the HPA axis, hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal glands, but there are other axes as well that operate. And these pick up signals from your environment, either your internal environment or your external environment. And your internal environment will include the kind of microbiome in your gut. It will include the belief systems you're holding, the kind of toxic thoughts that are going round and round in your head. And so stress is such a big, wider field really than we've ever considered. And it affects very distinctly how your immune system functions. So it actually depresses your immune system. And one of the worst emotions, or the most impactful, I think, is kind of fear. And fear that is driven not just from your internal dynamic, what you've absorbed from your upbringing, but also what's going on in the external world right now is a pandemic of fear, as Ian has said. And I think what we're seeing here is an incredible need for people to have certainty. And when they don't have certainty, they are going to fix on something that seems like it offers certainty. And in psychological terms, we call this a mass formation psychosis. And I think that's what we're in right now, with a message that we are alone, we are battling a virus, we are without resources. So we're kind of have this free floating anxiety that there's nothing we can do. We don't have connection with each other because we've been told to stay, 6 feet apart or wear masks, or during the lockdowns, we weren't even allowed to go out. And we have these unresolved emotional experiences from our past, which kind of create a burden of unexpressed fear, aggression, sadness, which kind of bursts out in the form of wanting to fix on one solution, which in this case has been the vaccine. And it is quite an incredible thing to witness this happening. And although I don't want to go in too much into the politics, it is being kind of used in ways that are encouraging this mass compliance and creating this climate of fear, which is depressing immunity, it's depressing mental health. And we're seeing far more of a result from that than we ever will of damage from the virus. And we're also seeing long-term complications as well from long COVID, which it bears all the hallmarks of a chronic fatigue-related syndrome, which I deal with a lot. And so overall, just a quick summary, stress is everywhere, but it can be mitigated. It needs to be dealt with in terms of connection with nature, connection with each other, connection with your own feelings, and also support from each other is really vital. Human beings are co-regulated. We need others to help us feel good about ourselves. And so everything about this current situation is depressing our immunity. It's depressing the way our mitochondria, even in our cells, are expressing themselves, because they're far more than energy factories. They're actually a multi-systemic messenger service, right? They send messages around the body, and actually they're part of our stress resilience when they work well. So it's a perfect storm right now in the world, and we need to do something about it as practitioners. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. So thank you. I hope that was 5 minutes, roughly.
Thanks, Patricia. That was excellent. Paul.
Right, great. Ian, is that any better now? Can you hear me properly now?
Unfortunately, it's still crackly. Still quite broken up.
I've just got one more thing I can try then, if you just give me 1 moment.
An alternative, Paul, is we could always get you to do a video of what you're going to say, and I could share that tomorrow. Yeah, Sue said, try turning off your camera and just see if the quality is better, at least if we can hear you.
I'm just trying a different microphone. I don't know if that's any
better. No, I think it's your internet because it's still crackly.
All right. Okay, well then maybe we should do the video tomorrow.
Try switch off your video and see if that works. Okay, speak to us.
Is that any better now? Yeah?
No, it's still the same, I'm afraid. Yeah, would you be able to do a short video tomorrow and then I can share it?
Yeah, I can do that, yeah, because I have something to contribute there.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Paul. Sorry we couldn't hear you now. Paul Oran, are you ready?
Yes, Ian, ready to go. So Paul's loss, unfortunately, is my gain. So that maybe gives me a little bit more than 5 minutes to have a sprint through what I wanted to speak about. This fits in beautifully, really, with what Ian and Patricia has been saying. Maybe 18 months ago now, 2 years ago, I wrote an article for Ian on athletes' ecosystems. And I think this translates very well from our athletes to the current situation that we find ourselves in. And as I say, fits in beautifully with everything that Ian and Patricia was saying. The point that I was really trying to make, that as practitioners, we've got a habit of focusing in on the detail. So we'll see a client, we'll see an athletic client, we'll get them to complete their questionnaires, and we'll look at their general health, we'll look at their food intake, we'll look at their training programs, we'll look at their sleep patterns, we'll look at their bowel movements, etc., etc., etc. And this is what I see and I view as the rings on the tree, the growth rings on a tree. You can look at those growth rings and you can see how the tree has grown. You can see years of drought. You can see years of really good growth. You can see maybe where there's been a forest fire. And it'll give you a huge amount of information just looking at the detail. But whether we're looking at a tree, whether we're looking at an athlete, whether we're looking at something much wider like we're going through at the moment, we've got to bring this focus out in the same way as Ian was talking about microscopes and telescopes. I would put it in view of trees and rainforests. We've got to get away from purely looking at the tree and look at the entire forest, the entire ecosystem. So what do I mean by that with regards to athletes? So you've got all of the detail that all of us know and love so much. But what about things like personal relationships? What about things like finances? What about supportive wives or husbands? What about peer pressure? You know, there's so many factors that are actually involved in everything that makes up an athlete, whether it's their performance or whether it's their health and long-term health. Because again, I've made the point that I think very strongly that as practitioners, as good practitioners, we have an obligation not only to look after our clients' performance and health here and now, but we're laying the foundations potentially for that client's health for many, many years into the future. And are we looking at just at getting that guy or girl a medal, winning the race, performing well in their sport, or are we looking at their both short and long-term health and all of the factors that are actually involved in that? Now, you're not going to get those straight away. This is going to come down to your personality and your relationship with a client. You're not going to find out all of these things straight away. Their mental approach to life is something that will only come out in drips and drabs. They might be a little bit hesitant, be perfectly happy to speak about their periodized training programs, but they'll be hesitant to speak about an awful lot of other things. And this will come out over time. And we've got to learn, we've got to nurture that client and our relationship with the client to take the bigger picture on everything that makes that client up. Now, putting that into a current perspective, I would say the detail of everything that we're looking at the moment and all that we're ever hearing at the moment is COVID, is vaccines, is antivirals, is masks. Those to me are the rings on the tree. But we've got to look much further than that. Some of them are very obvious: obesity, type 2 diabetes, immunosuppression, social economic factors, ethnic factors, people's approach to life, again, peer pressure, and even down to things like what TV channels do we watch? If you're based in the UK and you only watch the BBC, you will get one very defined view on everything that's going on at the moment. If you watch GB News or listen to talk radio, very, very different view. And with the whole cognitive dissonance thing actually sort of going on, once you start to burrow down one particular avenue, you will continue going down that route and you won't leave.
We're doing well with the internet tonight. I think it's Paul, isn't it? It's not me slowed down or anything. Okay. Let's give him a second to come back on. I just want to ask, is Henrietta still around? Yes, you are. Okay. Right, just stay and stand by. We'll see if Paul is available to just finish off. Speak to us.
That was me having technical problems here. Were we still there?
Yeah, you're just a bit broken up, but say something.
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay.
I'm afraid,
yeah, it's working.
My internet dropped out. So yeah, it was this. I'm fine before I had COVID. Well, probably not. And everything that Ian and Patricia were saying, looking at what was going on before somebody actually had COVID, and all of the triggers that actually led to that actually coming about. So whether we're looking at athletes, whether we're looking at people generally, I just think that we've got to zoom the picture out so much and try and find out everything that's actually going on with that particular individual and look at, as I say, look at the rainforest rather than the rings on the tree. So I'm sorry about the break in there, Ian, but if that's a decent summary for you on what people heard.
That's great. Thank you, Paul. I've just sent out a little intro to you as well, so people know who you are. And tomorrow we will send out your article on the ecosystems, if that's all right.
Of course it is.
And also I wrote an article recently on the same sort of immunology topic, so you get a bit more reading. I'd like to invite Henrietta to share her thoughts on this topic, and then we're going to open out to general Q&A. So please start typing observations and questions and discussion points into the chat box. And yeah, we'll do our best to respond to those. Hello there.
I'm here.
You've got an addition.
I do. I do. I have an athlete in the making.
Excellent. More the merrier.
Yeah, hopefully something that makes loads of money like tennis or football, but probably not. Probably pole vault. It goes nowhere. Thanks for inviting me. I got a message from Ian today saying, would I want to come along? And I'd actually already registered for this because I wanted to hear him speak. And it was, as always, a lovely overview and such a balanced approach, but really nice to hear him speak up and feel validated, because I definitely at times throughout the last 2 years I sometimes feel like I'm going mad because I don't see the pandemic in the same way that the majority of people do. And I am listening to both Paul and Patricia speak. It's resonated so much that's my source of anxiety. And it's funny that it's actually not the virus at all. It's the other side of it. It's the suppression and the control, and then the worry that what we're leaving for these guys in the future if we allow this to continue. So being around other people that I can talk about this with and hearing their thoughts is just such a relief for me, and just definitely brings my stress levels down. And we've talked a lot about viewing the whole person and the terrain, and that is really important. But on the flip side, there is this has been going on since the very beginning, the discussion on vitamin D, which is kind of me zooming back in again as opposed to zooming out. But it kind of has a long angle and a close-up lens. Vitamin D from the very beginning was talked about in cases of reducing the severity of the disease, but was quickly, in my opinion, suppressed because there's not a lot of money to be made out of vitamin D, and for many other reasons. If there's other treatments out there, then emergency exemptions don't make any sense. So the research has not been widely available, and people who know about it, governments that do know about it, haven't acted on it. But just in case you are with people who are concerned, or you have, you want to look after yourself and your athletes, it's such an easy and really safe supplement that you can recommend to pretty much everyone. The initial sort of concerns from people was that as a fat-soluble vitamin, there could be a level of toxicity associated with too much vitamin D. That's really not supported in almost any literature. The reason being that we have a sort of fail-safe mechanism to break down vitamin D if we do start getting too much, because we would have. If you think now that if you go outside in the midday sun for half an hour, that's the equivalent of 10,000 IU of vitamin D, supplementing 400 IU a day is A, really not touching the size, but B, it's really, we're not getting anywhere near the levels that we would have had, our ancestors would have had. But the research is really, really strong on, not only does it really support better outcomes if you get COVID, less time with the disease, but actually, because vitamin D is not true vitamin, it's actually a steroid hormone. It's to do with it has a role in communication between all the cells in our body, as well as the health of those cells in our body and the barrier function of those cells in our body. So the research also supports the fact that it reduces the chance of you contracting it in the first place, because you have literally a better barrier against the virus, and then a better functioning balanced immune system to fight it off. So although it looks like I'm zooming in on just one particular area here of, to do with COVID and the associated problems with the disease, it really is, it's something that can be used across the board safely. It's cheap, and we're all deficient in it anyway. And around the world, when you look at the places that have been little touched by COVID, they're the places that get the most sunshine, pretty much. So you're looking at looking at Africa, for example. Central Africa has a horribly low, well, I say horribly, has a low vaccination rate, quite well, good vaccination rate, in my opinion, about 6%. But they haven't really had anything like the waves of COVID that the Northern Hemisphere countries have had. And that's kind of true, around the world in places that have much more sunshine than we do. So, going from talking about sort of broad issues, I just wanted to give you all, I don't know, something a bit more maybe practical to go away with, that you can implement with any of your athletes, anyone in your family, and you right now, to protect yourself, is to take vitamin D every day. And I'm talking doses, of sort of 6,000 IU a day. And there's no danger of toxicity, but there's only going to be benefits to your health from this. So that was what I wanted to add in, really. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Henrietta. So yeah, I mean, I talked about telescopes and microscopes. Both are relevant. So vitamin D is the microscope example, same as vitamin C. You can go into, I loved interviewing Patrick Holford a year or so ago, and he talked for a whole hour on vitamin C, but then he also shared elderberries, which are grown every hedgerow in the UK. So all of these components have antiviral activity. Another thing I want to just throw out there, because even Henrietta has succumbed to this nomenclature, not nomenclature, this naming. We're now calling a COVID infection a disease, but we've never ever called viral infections disease before. Disease is only when maybe it triggers you into disease state of some type. So we need to also be careful with our language in the description of this. So we're over amplifying like the fear of that singular organism by the way we describe it as well. Okay, so Samoan, I've been reading on Nigella Sativa as an antiviral and wondered if anyone has experience using it for prevention. I'll have to pass on that one. Does anyone online have any experience with that? Moira, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, I did look into this. Hi there, Ian. Nice to see you again.
You too.
After a while. Yeah, I actually looked into this a while ago because Nigella Sativa is one of the alternatives for ivermectin that's recommended by the World Health Council. So I did do a little search myself on this to see, and there are actually quite a few studies out there, generally coming from places like India, where people haven't got as much money and using alternative treatments. So there's studies out there, for example, on honey and Nigella, mainly for treatment rather than prevention, I think, on the whole. But I would, guess that probably, if you wanted to stop the virus coming in to start with, it's going to be just as effective. That's my best guess. I have used it myself when I thought I had COVID, but actually I didn't. So it might have helped with something else.
Yeah, I think many of us won't really know if we've had it or not, because in my opinion, my humble opinion, I'm not an immunologist, but just an observation, viruses go around. They have to go around. So we've all possibly, or most of us have had interaction with it. And possibly most of us are getting exposure to it, and then our immune system's pushing it off. And we don't know, just like any other infection. So if the flu goes round, not every single person of every single household will fall down with the flu. Any other questions that anyone would like to raise? Anything else you would like to add, Paul or Pooja? Or Henrietta, if you're still around?
Yeah, I can certainly put something on, Ian. I think that what we're going through at the moment with all of the information, well, I use the word information loosely, but everything that's coming through at the moment, which seems to be sort of browbeating us into some form of conformity with the bigger picture that the state is trying to put across. I think it's our perception of the problem or the perceived problem that's sort of like so important. I think if we try and worry about everything that we're being bombarded with, particularly by the mainstream media, you'd probably never get out from under your duvet in the morning. Our own sphere of influence, that is what we can control. And if we can control that, we've all got the ability to thrive, or the opposite within that. We've all got the opportunity to make money or lose money within our own sphere of influence. And I think that's what we've got to try and control as much as we can. There was I think I've shown you this before, Ian, and I've got a horrible feeling that I might have stolen this from Patricia. And if I have, I apologise immediately, Patricia. But perception of problem is it. It's not the problem that is the problem. It is our perception of the problem. And the wonderful graphic way I've seen this described is that if this is the size of the problem, then if this is all that we're concentrating on, it becomes that. And it overtakes everything actually within what we're looking at. But if I do that and we actually look at the overall picture and we're now taking a global view on it, the size of the problem hasn't changed. The size of the problem is exactly the same, but we're taking a much more rounded view on it and we can see the bigger picture rather than just the problem. That is still here, still got to be dealt with, but it's not that size of a problem. So it's, once again, it's our perception of an issue that is probably, and it's been manipulated, without getting too political, it's been manipulated by everything that we're seeing and hearing at the moment. I think we'll rise above that and actually look after ourselves, look after our clients, look after our families. Sorry, that's a bit of a rant, Ian, but I just wanted to get that off my chest. And I do apologise, Patricia, if I did steal that particular idea from you.
She's a sharing person, so
I'll give you that one. Can I add the perception, the distortion of perception is a traumatic response. All right, it's absolutely what happens in trauma is little things become blown out of all proportion. You know, people get triggered so easily, they can't sleep, they can't eat, they can't function in life because something small has triggered a massive response. And when we talk about emotional trauma, we say it's not the thing that happened, it's our perception of the thing that happened. And so this is really agreeing with you, Paul, that it's trauma in a time of trauma and the perception has been totally skewed. And it's what you said, Ian, it takes away all the power from us as individuals and communities and gives it away to authorities and elites and says, you fix it because we can't do anything. And I really want to say there's plenty we can do. Getting ourselves healthy, in order, making our relationships good, strong and healthy. Yeah, feeding ourselves the right food, all of those things, but also, you know, hope. Having hope is a massive antidote to the fear that we're seeing here. And you know, every day I have to kind of ground myself in that so that we don't disappear into this this morass that we are seeing in such a limited view of what's going on. And I've given up watching mainstream media, absolutely given up. Don't want to watch it anymore. So there is hope, folks. So that's all I wanted to say.
There's a phrase that I've heard, Ian, and I'm probably going to get this quote wrong, that between stimulus and response, there's a pause. And it's how we deal with that pause. And again, Patricia's nodding sagely again. If I've stolen this from you, please forgive me. But between the stimulus and our response to it, there is this pause. It's how we manage the pause, which is the important thing. If we're watching the BBC News at night or whatever it may actually be, then how we deal with that, again, is up to ourselves. Very easy to say, not quite so easy to do, but it's almost worth being aware of that it's manage the pause. Okay, thanks, Ian.
Nice one, thank you. Patricia, you've got a question from Moira. Moira, do you want to ask it yourself?
Well, I'll just add a little personal reflection, if I might, because it's not really specifically to do with athletes. It's just to do with people in general and how they feel at the minute. In that, my daughter was ill before Christmas a couple of weeks, and she wasn't particularly ill at all. But on the first day, I wasn't sure, so I didn't send her into school. On the second day, she was off. She started getting texts from a wider group of friends, not her best friends, along the lines of, have you done a test? Why not? You're going to kill my parents. And I actually had to make a complaint to the school. The school actually said I could refer it to the police. I didn't do that because I actually feel I'd already been in touch with the school because I was quite concerned about language coming home from school that my daughter was telling me about in her group of friends and how anxious they were about the whole thing. And I mean, I've never been scared all the way through this. I don't think it's helpful to be scared for a start, you know, and I've done the best to look after us, so I'm not prepared to live under any kind of fear at all. I've instilled that in my children as well, but I'm not sure sometimes in the current climate that's perhaps always the best thing for them in that situation, unfortunately, because they're probably commenting on things at school that, you know, may come across to other people as, you know, less caring, I suppose. And it's not that they're less caring, it's just that they're not scared. But this thing about the nocebo effect, which I've seen written about a couple of times during the pandemic, you know, obviously, you know, we all know the placebo effect, but the nocebo effect is just as strong in my understanding. And I was just keen to hear sort of Patricia's view on it, really. And I really worry that society, when I hear some of the language being used out there, it is horrendous, really. And it's horrendous how scared people have become and what that is probably doing to their immune system. So yeah, I'd be grateful for Patricia's views.
Yeah, thank you. It's a really good observation. I mean, I've had friends who've similarly had experiences like that, where they've received texts from so-called friends who are saying, you know, unless you take the vaccine, you're going to die, or you're going to kill someone, you know, and we don't want to see you until you do, kind of thing, that kind of pressure. And I think it's gone beyond nocebo, really. I think it's now down to psychosis, and we're not seeing the actual the truth of in a kind of critical way. We're seeing that there's this war on, a war of words, and a lot of what our young people are being encouraged to do is to kind of inform on each other, to police each other. That's what's going on, and we're seeing it more and more as the fear level grows, because up to now they haven't had to take the vaccine. It's only recently that's been offered to younger people. So it's this mass conformity, which, by the way, is a feature of that age group as well. So we've seen it in older adults very clearly, in the mask wearing and the Save the NHS and all of that pot banging which we had last year. But in young people of those sort of teenage years, what's happening in their brains is their brains are trying to form their sense of self. And in doing so, particularly in girls, they are peer formed. So they look at what their peers are doing and make their kind of sense of self based on other people's reactions. And so it's very much peer leading peer here. And we don't have any wisdom. We don't have any leaders who are prepared to stand up with years of experience. Even a scientific background would be nice, you know, that really understand the science instead of just parroting what they're told. So we don't have wisdom here. We just have data. And data can be manipulated in any way, shape or form. And the pharmaceutical industry are very, very good at manipulating data to give whatever message they want. And we have governments who are largely illiterate in terms of science and understanding. And so they're just following what they think is the right thing to do. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I do think it's largely well-meaning people. Good people do bad things. So I'm broadening it out a little bit, but I am seeing that incredible peer pressure. And incidentally, my final word, I bought a book recently, which was called Tyranny, and it's based on the experiences of the 20th century in Europe and what happened in Europe. And it was regular people that enabled the atrocities to happen because they want to conform, because they don't want to be judged as separate and independent from what's going on, because they feel afraid of that. So we really have to speak up, as Ian said. It's time to be honest about what's going on and to speak up and have an alternative discussion, a narrative that doesn't say that this is the only way forward. So I feel sorry for your daughter. I think that's an awful experience, but she's not alone. There's many, many people who've gone through that, and it's absolutely awful. And we need an adult in the room now to say enough is enough. So, and that's not happening. Thank you, though.
Thanks, Patricia. I think that slowly, we're going to have a few adults in the room as we get pushed more into a corner. I think there'll be more people starting to speak up, and I've seen that over the last few months. So, as I say, I'm hopeful for this year. I just want to address Rick's question. Rick's open water swim coach, who has rightly taken the view, the observation that, yeah, cold water immersion is good for us, but people are getting obsessive about that. It's very similar to the fasted training kind of example I gave earlier. If your body's healthy and balanced, yes, go and do it intermittently, intermittent fasting. Same with cold water immersion. You've got, yeah, it's big news right now. So like the Wim Hof method, but we can always take too much to the extreme. It's the same as, well, exercise is good for us. Exercise creates a hormetic response for a physiological adaptation. That is what training is. If you overtrain, it breaks down that physiological capability to respond. So yes, there's an inverted U. I've done a lot of research in different physiological areas within the athletic body. And in my mind, there's an inverted U for everything. So if you're moderate, you'll have good health, good physiology. If you're extreme, it goes on goes to the other side. So obviously you don't want to be a sedentary slob, but absolutely you can't be an extreme person as well. And yeah, unfortunately we're in an era of extremism a bit as well. Okay, so Patricia, thank you. And thanks for staying past the 7 o'clock. I really appreciate your inputs. I'm going to wrap up the meeting now, unless there's any further questions or inputs. Moira, were you wanting to come on there? No, okay, you flashed up for some reason, but you're not unmuted. So I want to just sort of finish with this. We've shared things in let's say a big picture perspective tonight. occasionally dropping down into the microscope view. We've been careful not to say anything that's, you know, could add conspiracy theory or any of these like alternatives that are fear to the masses, if you like. But we've tried to just give general education. There are a lot of people out there who are speaking up with their own views, and there are people with a lot of data, alternative data to what's been pushed through the standard media channels. If you want more information, you can email me directly and I can link you to videos that are online. A lot of videos have been censored and taken offline, but there are still access to information if you want to dive a wee bit deeper in your knowledge of this area. Okay. So Q, hopefully we've stimulated some thought with you. Hopefully we've assured you that you're not alone, you're not having to isolate and keep yourself away from everyone else. We need to go out there and really make this a good new year, because it's only us that do that. As practitioners like Patricia will tell you, your day is only as good as you decide it's going to be when you start the day, okay? It's all within your ability to create that destiny, okay? So I'm gonna leave you with that thought. Be lovely to see you in other webinars, so please keep in touch, and as I say, fire over any questions. I'll be happy to get back to you. Okay, so happy January, and take care everyone.